The store was dead quiet, the kind of quiet where you can hear the buzz of the freezer and your own heartbeat if you stand still long enough. It was a little after midnight when I saw him, standing out at Pump 4. The red jacket caught my eye first, bright under the pale wash of the floodlights. It looked new, sharp, but the man wearing it didn't. His head hung low, his hands shoved in his pockets, still as a mannequin. I stepped to the door, half expecting him to come inside, but he just stood there, unmoving, face shadowed under the brim of his cap. Then, slow as a film reel starting to burn, he raised his head. His eyes, what I could see of them, were pale, washed out, like they'd been sitting in the sun for years. I blinked, and he was gone. The pump handle swayed gently in the night breeze, dripping gasoline onto the concrete. I stepped outside, the cold air cutting sharp against my face, and froze. The puddle wasn't just fuel. It had spread wide and thin across the ground, forming a single word I didn't understand. And the smell. It was wrong. Not fuel. Not oil. Something older. That was 3 months ago. My first week at Wickham's Quick Stop on Route 60, just outside Farmville. I'm Garrett Webb, 24, and I ended up in this corner of Southside Virginia because my ex-girlfriend kept the apartment in Richmond and I kept the debt. Farmville seemed far enough away to start over, close enough that my beat-up Corolla could make the drive without breaking down. The job listing was simple. Night shift associate wanted. Must be reliable. Good pay for right candidate. What it didn't mention was old Pete Wickham, the 70-something owner who'd inherited this place from his father, along with a set of handwritten protocols that made no sense at first glance. These rules kept this store running for 40 years, Pete told me on my first day, sliding a coffee-stained index card across the counter. My daddy followed them. I followed them. You'll follow them too if you want to keep working here. I almost laughed. 7 simple rules for working the night shift? How hard could it be? The card sat in the register drawer now, edges worn soft from handling. I'd memorized every line, every strange instruction that seemed designed by someone who'd never actually worked retail. But Pete paid me $15 an hour, double what the Food Lion down the road offered, so I kept my mouth shut and learned to follow his father's rules. What I didn't know then was that those rules weren't meant to make the job easier. They were meant to keep me alive. Route 60 stretches through some of the loneliest parts of Virginia, cutting through farmland and forgotten tobacco fields where the mist hangs thick on autumn mornings. Our store sat at the intersection with Briary Creek Road, serving truckers and somniacs, and the occasional college student from Longwood University looking for late-night snacks. Most nights, the work was exactly what you'd expect. Stop the coolers, mop the floors, ring up energy drinks and cigarettes for people who looked as tired as I felt. But some nights the rules started to make sense. The rules card had been tucked behind the register manual for weeks before I actually read them. Pete's handwriting was cramped, faded blue ink on yellow paper that felt brittle between my fingers. Night shift protocols, Wickham's Quick Stop. Follow these exactly, no exceptions. H. Wickham, 1983. Rule 1. Never serve customers who pay only in pre-1965 silver coins. Apologize, say the register is broken, and wait for them to leave. Rule 2. If the coffee pot starts brewing by itself after 2 a.m., let it finish. Do not drink the coffee. Pour it down the drain at exactly 4:17 a.m. Rule 3. When the payphone rings, it will. Answer with Wickham's. If the caller asks for directions to Hampton Sydney College, Give them the wrong way. Always send them toward Burkeville. Rule 4. If a customer brings exactly 13 items to the counter, count them twice. If still 13, refuse the sale. Tell them the scanner is down. Rule 5. The bathroom door will sometimes lock itself. Do not force it open. Slide the key under the door and wait exactly 10 minutes. Rule 6. If you see a red vehicle at the pumps with no driver inside, do not approach. Turn off the outside lights until it leaves. Rule 7. Never, under any circumstances, look directly at your reflection in the security monitor after 3 a.m. Keep your eyes on the screens showing the pumps and aisles. I'd laughed the first time I read them. Rural Virginia was full of superstitions. My grandmother in Danville still hung iron horseshoes over every doorway and refused to let anyone whistle indoors. These seemed like more of the same folksy nonsense, maybe Pete's way of keeping night shift workers alert and paranoid. But that Tuesday in October, when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in 2 hours and fog rolled in off the Appomattox River, Rule 2 became very real. I was restocking the cigarette rack behind the counter when I heard it. The gurgling hiss of the coffee maker kicking to life. The red brew light glowed like an ember in the dim store. My watch read 2:14 a.m. The machine was ancient, a Mr. Coffee with a cracked carafe that Pete refused to replace. "Works fine," he'd say whenever I mentioned it. "Been making coffee here longer than you've been alive." I watched the dark liquid drip into the pot, filling the store with the rich scent of fresh grounds. My stomach growled. I'd skipped dinner, planning to grab something from the roller grill, but the hot dogs had looked questionable even by convenience store standards. The coffee smelled perfect. Better than perfect. Like the expensive stuff my ex used to buy from that place in Carytown. My mouth watered as steam curled up from the pot. Do not drink the coffee. The rule echoed in my head, but it seemed ridiculous. Why would Pete care if I had a cup of coffee? The stuff probably cost him 30 cents to make. I reached for a foam cup from the stack beside the machine. The coffee had finished brewing, the pot full and fragrant. All I had to do was pour it. That's when I noticed the grounds. Coffee grounds don't move. They sit in the filter, dark and wet and still. But these were shifting, swirling in slow circles like they were caught in a current. And the smell, underneath the rich coffee aroma, was something else. Something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in water. I stepped back from the machine. The coffee was the wrong color now, too dark, almost black, and thick. As I watched, it began to overflow the pot, but instead of spilling onto the warming plate, it seemed to flow upward, defying gravity, forming thin streams that twisted through the air like smoke. The streams reached toward me. I stumbled backward, knocking over the cup display. Foam cups scattered across the floor, but I barely noticed. The coffee streams were getting longer, stretching across the counter, and where they touched the air, frost began to form. The temperature in the store plummeted. My breath came out in visible puffs, and ice crystals started forming on the inside of the windows. The coffee streams pulsed, growing thicker, and I could swear I heard something in their movement. A whisper, barely audible, speaking words I couldn't understand. I ran to the back office and slammed the door. Through the security monitors, I watched the coffee streams continue their dance for another hour, weaving patterns in the air that hurt to look at directly. Finally, at 4:17 a.m. exactly, they collapsed back into the pot with a sound like breaking glass. The coffee looked normal again, light brown, steaming gently. I walked out to the machine on shaking legs, picked up the pot with a dish towel, and poured every drop down the drain. The liquid hissed when it hit the metal, leaving dark stains that took 20 minutes of scrubbing to remove. When Pete came in at 6 a.m., he took one look at my face and nodded. "Coffee maker acting up again?" he asked, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I just stared at him. "You followed the rule, though." "Good." "That's good, Garrett. My daddy would be proud." He never explained what would have happened if I'd taken that drink. Hi, everyone. Before we move forward, I have something exciting to tell you. Many of you asked for stories without the strange rules, so I created a brand new channel just for that. It's called Mr. Grimm Archive. The link is in the description, or you can click the card above. I think you'll really enjoy it. So check it out whenever you want some more exciting types of stories. Also, I hope you're enjoying the 2 uploads a day. Let me know in the comments if you like some stories from your location. Now, let's continue with today's story. 3 weeks passed before I saw another red vehicle. The coffee incident had left me jumpy, checking the rule card obsessively during my shifts. I'd started keeping a small notebook, documenting every strange occurrence. The way the freezer compressor would suddenly go silent at 2:43 a.m., how the radio would sometimes pick up broadcasts in languages I couldn't identify, the fact that we sold exactly 17 lottery tickets every night, no matter how many customers came through. Pete noticed my newfound diligence. "You're learning," he'd say when he found me restocking shelves that didn't need restocking, just to stay busy. Daddy always said the night shift teaches you patience. I was starting to think Harold Wickham had been a deeply disturbed man. The red Camaro appeared on a Thursday night, during the first cold snap of November. I was reading a paperback behind the counter, some thriller about serial killers that seemed laughable compared to my current reality, when the motion sensor chimed. Through the window, I saw it pull up to pump 2. Cherry red, immaculate paint job that reflected the overhead lights like a mirror. The engine cut off, but no one got out. I waited, watching through the glass doors, expecting a driver to emerge and start pumping gas. Minutes passed. The car sat there, engine ticking as it cooled, but the driver's seat remained empty. So did the passenger seat. In fact, from what I could see through the windshield, the entire interior was vacant. My stomach dropped as I remembered Rule 6. I fumbled for the light switches behind the counter. The exterior floodlights died with a size-fine click, plunging the pumps into darkness. Only the red glow of our neon open sign remained, casting everything in the color of dried blood. Through the security monitors, I watched the car in grainy black and white, still empty, still waiting. The minutes crawled by. I tried to focus on my book, but the words might as well have been written in Sanskrit. Every few seconds, my eyes drifted back to the monitor showing pump 2. The car never moved, but sometimes the camera angle seemed slightly different, as if it were slowly rotating in place. At 1:47 a.m., the payphone rang. The ancient rotary phone sat on the wall near the restroom, a relic from when payphones were actually profitable. Pete kept it around for emergencies, though I'd never seen anyone use it. The ringer was loud, harsh, cutting through the quiet store like a fire alarm. I stared at it, my book forgotten. Rule 3, answer with Wickham's. On the 4th ring, I picked up. Wickham's. Static filled the line, punctuated by what sounded like breathing. Then, a woman's voice, thin and distant. "I need directions to Hampton-Sydney College." My mouth went dry. This was it, exactly what the rule described. "Take Route 60 west toward Burkeville," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "You can't miss it." "Burkeville?" The woman sounded confused. "But that's the wrong way. I need to go to Hampton-Sydney." "Trust me," I said. "Burkeville's what you want." A long pause. Then, "Thank you." The line went dead. I hung up the phone with trembling hands and immediately checked the monitor. The red Camaro was still there, but now its headlights were on, cutting twin beams through the darkness. As I watched, it began to move, not pulling away from the pump, but backing up. Slowly, smoothly, until it disappeared from the camera's view. I switched to the monitor covering the road. The car was there, stopped at the edge of the parking lot, headlights pointing toward Route 60, waiting. 5 minutes later, a pair of headlights appeared from the east, coming fast. A white sedan, probably doing 60 on the 2-lane road. It slowed as it approached our intersection, then turned left toward Burkeville, following the directions I'd given. The moment it disappeared around the bend, the red Camaro's lights went out. When I switched back to pump 2, it was gone. I stood there in the dark store, surrounded by the hum of refrigerators and the distant sound of trucks on the interstate, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. Someone had called asking for directions to Hampton-Sydney College, a real place, maybe 15 miles northeast of here. I'd sent them in the opposite direction, toward Burkeville, a town that barely existed anymore except for a post office and a few rundown houses. And somehow, a driverless car had been waiting to... What? Follow them? The thought made my skin crawl. I turned the exterior lights back on and tried to return to my book, but concentration was shot. Every car that passed on Route 60 made me look up, wondering if it was the white sedan, wondering if whoever was inside would ever make it to their actual destination. At 3 a.m., I made the mistake of glancing at my reflection in the security monitor. It wasn't a conscious decision, just a momentary lapse. The kind of automatic gesture you make 100 times a day without thinking. But the moment my eyes met my own in the grainy black and white screen, I knew I'd screwed up. The reflection smiled. I wasn't smiling. My face was tense, worried, focused on the monitors, but the Garrett in the screen grinned wide, showing teeth that seemed too sharp, too numerous. His eyes were black holes in his pale face, and his head tilted at an angle that would have snapped my neck. I jerked my gaze away, my heart hammering against my ribs. When I looked back, the reflection was normal again. Just me, looking terrified and small under the harsh fluorescent lighting. But for the rest of the night, I could feel it watching me. Every time I passed the monitor, every time I moved within range of the camera, I sensed that other version of myself tracking my movements, waiting for me to look again. I kept my eyes on the floor until Pete arrived at 6 a.m. He found me restocking the candy aisle for the 3rd time that night, hands shaking as I arranged Snickers bars with obsessive precision. "Rough night?" he asked, pouring himself coffee from the fresh pot I'd brewed at 5:30. "The payphone rang," I said. "Someone needed directions to Hampton-Sydney." Pete nodded gravely. "You sent them toward Burkeville?" "Yeah, and there was a red car. No driver. I turned off the lights like the rule said." "Good." He sipped his coffee, studying my face. "What else?" I hesitated. I looked at the monitor. After 3 a.m., by accident. Pete's expression darkened. He set down his cup and walked over to the security system, studying the screens with an intensity I'd never seen before. After a long moment, he switched the entire system off and back on, waiting for it to reboot. "Should be fine now," he said finally. "But Garrett?" "That rule isn't a suggestion. The cameras. They pick up things that shouldn't be there. Things that use reflections to get closer to our world." I wanted to ask what he meant, but something in his tone made me keep quiet. Some questions I was learning were better left unasked. The nightmares started 2 days after the monitor incident. Always the same dream. I'm working my shift, everything normal, when I notice my reflection in the register screen. But this time, the other Garrett doesn't stop at smiling. He reaches through the glass, his fingers pushing through the surface like it's made of water. And I wake up with my heart racing and the taste of copper in my mouth. Friday night brought the worst thunderstorm I'd seen since moving to Farmville. Rain hammered the roof like buckshot, and lightning split the sky every few seconds, turning the parking lot into a strobing dance floor. The power flickered twice but held steady, probably thanks to the ancient generator Pete kept out back. I was mopping near the freezer section when the bathroom door slammed shut. The sound echoed through the store like a gunshot. I'd left it propped open while cleaning, standard procedure to keep the motion sensor from triggering the lights every time someone walked past. Now, it sat closed, the brass knob reflecting the overhead lighting. I tried the handle, locked, solid. Rule 5 floated up from memory. The bathroom door will sometimes lock itself. Do not force it open. Slide the key under the door and wait exactly 10 minutes. The key ring hung from a clip on my belt. 3 keys total: storefront, office, and bathroom. Simple enough. I knelt down and slid the bathroom key under the door, metal scraping against tile. Then I waited. The storm outside seemed to intensify, wind howling around the building like a living thing. I leaned against the wall across from the bathroom, checking my phone every 30 seconds. The minutes crawled by with agonizing slowness. At the 7-minute mark, I heard singing. Faint at first, barely audible over the storm, but definitely coming from inside the bathroom. A woman's voice, high and sweet, singing something that sounded like a lullaby. The melody was familiar, tugging at memories I couldn't quite place. Something my mother used to hum while doing dishes, maybe. Or a song from childhood that had been buried by years of forgetting. The singing grew louder, clearer, and with it came other sounds: running water, the squeak of sneakers on wet tile, the soft splash of someone moving through standing water. But we didn't have a bathtub, just a toilet, sink, and a small utility closet where Pete stored cleaning supplies. I pressed my ear to the door. The singing was definitely coming from inside, accompanied by what sounded like a child playing in a bath. Giggling, splashing, the gentle slap of small hands against water. My watch showed 8 minutes. The singing stopped. Silence filled the store, broken only by the storm and the ever-present hum of the refrigeration units. I strained to hear more, but whatever had been inside the bathroom had gone quiet. At exactly 10 minutes, the door clicked open. I pushed it wide and flipped on the light. Empty bathroom, dry floor, no sign that anyone, or anything, had been inside. Even the key was lying on the tile exactly where I had slid it under the door. But the air smelled like bubble bath. Sweet, floral, with an undertone of something else. Something organic and warm that reminded me of the creek behind my grandmother's house in summer. I locked the door and walked away. The rest of the night passed quietly until 4 a.m. brought my first encounter with Rule 1. She looked normal enough walking through the front doors. A middle-aged woman in a faded Longwood University sweatshirt, graying hair pulled back in a ponytail. She nodded pleasantly and wandered the aisles, picking up items with the careful consideration of someone on a tight budget. I was restocking the cigarette display when she approached the counter with her purchases: a pack of crackers, a bottle of water, and a candy bar. Nothing unusual. "That'll be $4.23, I said, scanning the items. She opened an old leather purse and began counting coins onto the counter. Not regular change. These were older, heavier, with a dull silver sheen that caught the light differently than modern coins. She laid them out one by one. Quarters, dimes, a few $50 that looked like they belonged in the museum. I picked up one of the quarters, turning it over in my palm. The eagle on the back was different from modern coins, and the date read 1964. The $50 was even older, 1943. Pre-1965 silver coins. "I'm sorry," I said, sliding the money back across the counter. "Our register is having problems tonight. Can't process cash transactions right now." The woman's pleasant expression never changed, but something shifted behind her eyes. A flicker of something cold and predatory that was there and gone so fast I almost missed it. "Register problems?" she asked, her voice carrying just the slightest edge. "Yeah, sorry about that. Electrical storm's been messing with our systems all night." She studied my face for a long moment, then scooped the coins back into her purse with movements that seemed too fluid, too graceful for someone her age. "Of course," she said finally. "These old storms can be quite troublesome." She turned and walked toward the door, but paused at the threshold. Without looking back, she spoke again. "You know, I've been shopping here for a very long time. Longer than you might think." The door chimed as she left, but when I looked through the windows, the parking lot was empty. No car, no sign she'd ever been there except for the faint scent of old perfume and something else. Something like wet earth and rotting leaves. I was still staring out the window when a pickup truck pulled up to pump 3. The driver got out, a big guy in coveralls with Danville Construction stitched on the chest, and started filling his tank. Normal customer, normal transaction. But when he came inside to pay, something about his purchases made my skin crawl. 13 items. Exactly. I counted them as he set them on the counter. Energy drink, beef jerky, 2 candy bars, pack of gum, lighter, cigarettes, aspirin, bag of peanuts, bottle of Coke, package of crackers, air freshener, and a lottery ticket. 13. I counted again, sure I'd made a mistake. Still 13. Rule 4 was crystal clear. If a customer brings exactly 13 items to the counter, count them twice. If still 13, refuse the sale. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice catching slightly. "Scanner's down. Can't ring anything up right now." The man, Travis, according to his name tag, frowned. "Scanner's down?" It was working fine for the dad before me. He was right. I just processed a credit card transaction 5 minutes earlier without any problems. But the rule was the rule. And after everything I'd witnessed, I wasn't about to start making exceptions. "System's been acting up all night," I said. "Storm's playing hell with the electronics." Travis stared at me for a long moment, then began putting his items back into his basket one by one. As he worked, I noticed his hands. They were clean. Too clean for someone who supposedly worked construction. No calluses, no grease under the nails, skin soft as a baby's. "Funny thing about storms," he said, not looking up from his task. "They have a way of revealing what's really underneath things, washing away all the pretense." When he finished packing up his items, he met my eyes again. His pupils were completely dilated, black circles that reflected the fluorescent lights like mirrors. "See you around, Garrett." I'd never told him my name. It wasn't on a badge, wasn't written anywhere visible, but he knew it just the same. He walked out into the storm, and I watched through the security monitors as his truck drove away. But in the grainy black and white footage, the vehicle looked wrong. Too long, too low, moving with a smooth gliding motion that pickup trucks weren't supposed to make. The rest of my shift passed without incident, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at it, and every reflection in the store's windows and glass surfaces felt like it might smile back at me. When Pete arrived at 6 a.m., he took one look at my face and started brewing coffee without a word. Only after he'd taken his first sip did he speak. "2 customers tried the rules tonight?" I nodded. "Silver coins and 13 items. And you followed protocol both times?" "Yeah." Pete nodded approvingly, but his expression remained troubled. "They're testing you, Garrett, seeing if you'll break. The fact that they're getting bolder." He trailed off, staring out the window at the gray morning sky. "What happens if I don't follow the rules?" Pete was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. "My daddy broke a rule once, just once. That's how I know what's at stake here." Pete's story came out in fragments over the next 3 nights, doled out between customers and restocking duties like breadcrumbs, leading deeper into a forest I wasn't sure I wanted to explore. Daddy was stubborn. Pete began on Monday, polishing the same spot on the counter he'd been working at for 10 minutes. Thought the rules were nonsense his grandfather made up to scare him. Said they were holding the business back. I was counting the till from the previous shift, trying to focus on the mundane task of sorting bills and coins. But Pete's words kept pulling my attention away. "What rule did he break?" I asked. Pete's hand stilled on the counter. Outside, a freight train rolled past on the Norfolk Southern tracks, its whistle echoing across the tobacco fields like a mournful ghost. "Rule 7, he said finally. "The monitor." He figured if he stared at his reflection long enough, he could prove there was nothing there. Nothing to be afraid of. The memory of my smiling reflection made my stomach twist. What happened? He disappeared for 3 days. Found him wandering Route 15 near Keysville, naked as the day he was born, speaking in tongues. Didn't remember his own name, let alone what had happened to him. Pete pulled out his wallet and extracted a faded photograph. A man who looked like an older version of Pete, standing behind this same counter, wearing the forced smile of someone posing for a Polaroid. But something about his eyes was wrong. They were too wide, too bright, like he was seeing things the camera couldn't capture. "This was taken a week after we found him," Pete continued. "He seemed normal by then. Remembered who he was, could work the register, held conversations, but he was different. Changed. Changed how? He could see them, the things that live in the spaces between, in reflections and shadows, in the gap between what is and what shouldn't be. And they could see him right back." I set down the stack of 20s I'd been counting. "What kind of things?" Pete studied my face, weighing how much to reveal. "The woman with the silver coins. She's been trying to buy something from this store since 1952. Same items, same coins, same disappointed smile when we refuse the sale. The man with 13 items changes his face every few years, but it's always the same hunger behind his eyes. What do they want? To cross over. To become real. The rules keep them at bay, keep them from using our world as a doorway to something worse." Pete folded the photograph and returned it to his wallet. Daddy understood that eventually, but by then the damage was done. They knew he could see them, so they never stopped visiting. Every night, standing just outside his peripheral vision, waiting for him to look. The bell above the door chimed, ending our conversation. A college-age girl came in, bought a Red Bull and a pack of chips, paid with a crumpled $5 bill. Normal customer, normal transaction. She left without incident, but I found myself studying her face, wondering if she was really what she appeared to be. "How did it end?" I asked when she was gone. "With your father?" Pete was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Then, he started leaving the house at night. Walking. We'd find him in the morning, sometimes miles away, always staring at something nobody else could see. Doctor said it was dementia, but I knew better. And one morning we didn't find him. State police searched for weeks, found his clothes folded neat as you please on the bank of the Appomattox, but no sign of him otherwise. Pete's voice cracked slightly. That was 15 years ago. Tuesday night brought a new kind of test. I was restocking the snack aisle when I noticed a customer I hadn't heard enter. She stood in the back corner near the beer cooler, a woman in her 30s wearing a sundress despite the November chill. Her back was to me, but something about her posture seemed off. Too straight, too still, like she was balanced on invisible strings. I approached slowly, my footsteps echoing in the quiet store. "Can I help you find something?" She turned, and I immediately understood why Pete's father had gone mad. Her face was mine. Not similar. Identical. Every freckle, every scar from childhood accidents, even the small mole near my left ear that I'd inherited from my mother. But the expression was wrong, predatory, wearing my features like an ill-fitting mask. "I'm looking for something specific," she said in my voice, but pitched higher, more feminine. "Something that belongs to me." My mouth went dry. This wasn't covered by any of the 7 rules. Whatever was happening now fell outside the protections Pete's grandfather had established. "We're well stocked," I managed. "What exactly do you need?" She smiled with my mouth showing my teeth. "Your reflection, Garrett. The one you left in the monitor. I've been taking care of it, keeping it safe. But I think it's time you had it back." She reached into her purse, my mother's old leather purse, I realized with growing horror, and pulled out a small mirror, the kind women keep for touching up makeup. The surface was black as oil, but when she tilted it toward me, I saw movement in the depths. It was me, but not me. The reflection moved independently, mouthing words I couldn't hear, pressing its hands against the glass from the inside. Its eyes were wide with terror, and its mouth was open in what looked like a scream. "He's been very lonely," the woman said. "Trapped in there with all the others who've looked too long, stared too deep. Would you like to trade places? It would be so much easier for everyone." I backed toward the counter, my hand reaching for the phone. "Get out. Get out of my store." "Your store?" She laughed, and the sound was like breaking glass. "Oh, Gad. This was never your store. You're just the night watchman, keeping the door open for those of us who need to pass through." The mirror in her hand began to glow, and my reflection inside grew more frantic, beating against the glass with bloody fists. Other faces appeared beside it. Older faces, younger faces, all wearing expressions of absolute despair. "Pete's father is in here too," she continued conversationally. "Harold Wickham. He says hello." That's when I noticed the security monitors were all showing the same image. Not the usual views of the pumps and aisles, but the interior of the mirror. Dozens of trapped faces staring out at me with pleading eyes. I grabbed the phone and dialed Pete's number. He answered on the first ring, as if he'd been waiting by the phone. "She's here," I said without preamble. "The woman with my face. She has a mirror with—" "Get to the office," Pete interrupted. "Lock the door. Don't look at anything reflective until I get there. Pete, go, now." I ran to the back office and slammed the door, turning the deadbolt Pete had installed but never explained. Through the thin walls, I could hear the woman moving around the store, humming that same lullaby I'd heard from the bathroom. Glass clinked as she touched bottles and jars, each sound sharp and distinct. "You can't hide forever," she called out sweetly. "The rules only work if you follow them all, and you've already broken one. The door is open now, Garrett. There's no closing it." She was right. I had looked at my reflection in the monitor after 3 a.m., had opened some kind of doorway I didn't understand, and now something that wore my face was walking around the store, carrying a mirror full of stolen souls. I sat in the dark office, surrounded by Pete's paperwork and old invoices, listening to the woman destroy everything outside. Glass shattered. Metal groaned. The cash register drawer opened and closed repeatedly, making its electronic chime over and over like a broken music box. When Pete's headlights finally swept across the parking lot 20 minutes later, the sound stopped. The store fell silent except for the refrigerators and the distant rumble of trucks on the interstate. But I could still smell my mother's perfume, the scent the woman had been wearing. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that she wasn't gone. She was just waiting. Pete came through the front doors carrying the shotgun and the duffel bag that clinked with every step. He moved with purpose, scanning the destroyed store like a soldier entering hostile territory. Broken glass covered the floor and every mirror surface. The security monitors, the refrigerator doors, even the metallic surface of the coffee pot had been shattered. "Garrett!" he called out. "You can come out now." I unlocked the office door and stepped into what remained of our quiet convenience store. The damage was surgical. Only reflective surfaces had been targeted, leaving everything else untouched. Even the cash register sat pristine on the counter, though its screen was spiderwebbed with cracks. "She's gone," I said. "No." Pete set his bag on the counter and unzipped it, revealing items I couldn't immediately identify. Bundles of dried herbs, small mirrors wrapped in black cloth, what looked like mason jars filled with dirt. "She's waiting. They always wait." He pulled out an ornate hand mirror, its silver surface gleaming under the fluorescent lights. This belonged to my great-grandmother. Been in our family since before the store was built. It's the only mirror in 50 miles that they can't use. Use for what? Crossing over. The thing wearing your face, it needs an anchor point. Someone from this world who's already partially connected to theirs. That's why breaking Rule 7 is so dangerous. You didn't just see your reflection, Garrett. You left a piece of yourself behind. Pete held up the mirror, angling it toward the broken security monitors. In its surface, I could see the store as it really was. Not the neat aisles and organized shelves, but a twisted funhouse version where the walls breathed and the ceiling stretched impossibly high. And there, standing beside the coffee machine, was the woman with my face. She noticed us looking and waved with my hand, grinning with my mouth. "Hello, Pete," she said, and her voice carried perfectly despite speaking from inside the mirror world. "It's been a long time. How's retirement treating you?" "About as well as death treated Daddy," Pete replied. He reached into his bag and pulled out a box of shells, loading them into the shotgun with practiced ease. "Let's finish this." The woman laughed. "Oh, we're way past shotgun shells, old man. Your precious rules are broken. The doorway's open. All I need now is for sweet Garrett here to look into one more mirror, and I can step through permanently." "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged?" The temperature in the store plummeted. Frost began forming on the remaining glass surfaces, and my breath came out in visible puffs. The woman in Pete's mirror stepped closer to the surface, pressing her palm against the glass from the inside. "You can't keep him from mirrors forever, Pete. Reflections are everywhere. Windows, puddles, the surface of his coffee cup. Sooner or later, he'll look. And when he does..." She smiled wider, showing too many of my teeth. "I'll be waiting." Pete pulled out one of the black-wrapped mirrors and began unwrapping it slowly. "These mirrors are traps," he explained to me while keeping his eyes fixed on the woman. "My great-grandfather made them back in 1883 when the first crossing attempts started. Each one can hold exactly one of them, but only if you can trick them inside." "And how do we do that?" "You have to offer them something they want more than crossing over." Pete finished unwrapping the mirror, revealing a surface so black it seemed to absorb light. "In this case, that's you." My stomach dropped. "What?" "The only way to trap her is to make her think she's won. You have to look into this mirror, let her start the crossing process, then break the connection at the last second." Pete's hand shook slightly as he held the trap. "But if you're even a second too late, I'll be stuck in there with her. Forever." The woman in the family mirror had grown larger somehow, filling more of the frame. Her image flickered and distorted, and for brief moments I could see other faces superimposed over mine. Pete's father, strangers I didn't recognize, all wearing expressions of pure terror. "Tick-tock, boys," she sang. "The longer you wait, the stronger I get. Soon I won't need your permission at all." As if to prove her point, the broken security monitors began to flicker back to life, their shattered screens showing fractured images of the mirror world bleeding through. In each fragment, I could see pieces of her, an eye here, a mouth there, all wearing my features like stolen clothing. "Do it," I said. Pete stared at me. "Garrett." "I broke the rule. This is my fault. If I don't fix it, she'll keep coming back, won't she? She'll keep trying to cross over." Pete nodded reluctantly. "Every night until she succeeds, and once she's through." He gestured at the broken store around us. "This is just the beginning. She'll use your identity to destroy everything and everyone you've ever cared about." I thought about my ex-girlfriend in Richmond, my parents in Norfolk, my grandmother in Danville with her iron horseshoes and superstitions that suddenly seemed a lot less foolish. This thing wearing my face would visit them all, would use my voice to get close, my appearance to gain their trust. "Tell me what to do." Pete positioned the black mirror on the counter, angling it carefully. "Look into it. Let her start the crossing. When I say now, you break eye contact and smash the mirror. The glass has to shatter completely, or she'll find a way out." I nodded, my mouth dry as sand. Pete handed me a hammer from his bag, old and heavy, with a wooden handle worn smooth by decades of use. "This was Daddy's," he said quietly. Seemed fitting. I approached the black mirror slowly. My reflection appeared gradually, like a photograph developing in reverse. But it wasn't quite right. The eyes were too bright, the smile too knowing. This was my face filtered through something else's consciousness. "That's it," the woman's voice whispered from the surface. "Come closer, Garrett. Let me show you what we could become together." The reflection began to change, showing me possibilities, myself in expensive clothes, driving cars I couldn't afford, living in houses I'd only dreamed of. The woman was offering me her world, a place where I could have anything I wanted. "She's lying," Pete said from somewhere behind me. "It's all lies." But the images kept coming. Me graduating from college, me with a job that mattered, me with friends and family who respected me instead of pitying me. The woman in the mirror reached out her hand, and I found myself reaching back. Our fingers touched the glass surface from opposite sides. The mirror erupted in light and sound, reality bending around the point where our hands met. I could feel myself being pulled forward, drawn into the glass like water down a drain. The store around me stretched and distorted, becoming the breathing, shifting nightmare version I'd seen in Pete's family mirror. "Now!" Pete shouted. "Break it now!" But I couldn't move. The woman's grip was too strong, her smile too hypnotic. She was pulling me through, and I could feel pieces of myself scattering like leaves in a hurricane. "Garrett?" Pete's voice sounded like it was coming from miles away. With every ounce of strength I had left, I raised the hammer and brought it down on the mirror's surface. The glass exploded in a shower of black fragments that sparkled like stars before dissolving into nothing. The woman's scream echoed from every surface in the store, a sound of rage and loss that seemed to go on forever, before finally fading to silence. I collapsed behind the counter, the hammer slipping from my numb fingers. Pete was beside me in an instant, checking my pulse, my breathing, my eyes. "Are you still you?" he asked urgently. I took inventory, memories, emotions, the scar on my knee from falling off my blank at age 7. Everything seemed intact, but I felt hollowed out, like something essential had been carved away. "I think so," I said. "Is she gone?" Pete looked around the destroyed store, then at his family mirror, which now showed nothing but our own mundane reflections. "For now. But Garrett," he helped me to my feet, his expression grim. "Breaking that mirror, trapping her, that only works temporarily. She's not dead, just contained. And the crossing attempt damaged something deeper." "What do you mean?" "The rules were put in place to maintain a barrier between worlds. Tonight we plugged one hole by creating another. The store isn't safe anymore. Not for someone like you who's been marked." Pete began gathering his supplies, wrapping the remaining mirrors in their black cloths. "You can't work here anymore. Can't even visit. Your presence would weaken what's left of the barrier." The weight of it hit me like a physical blow. Not just the loss of my job, but everything it represented. My fresh start, my independence, my chance to prove I could make it on my own in Virginia. What am I supposed to do? Pete paused in his packing, looking older than I'd ever seen him. "Run, Garrett. Run as far and as fast as you can. Because even trapped, she's still connected to you. And connection works both ways." Outside, dawn was breaking over the tobacco fields, painting the sky the color of fresh blood. Pete closed the store for good at 7 a.m. He worked methodically, boarding up the windows with plywood sheets he'd apparently kept stored in the back room for this exact purpose. Each board was marked with symbols I didn't recognize, spirals, intersecting lines, shapes that hurt to look at directly. "Containment sigils," he explained when he caught me staring. "My great-grandmother carved them during the influenza outbreak of 1918. That was the last time something broke through completely." I sat on the hood of my Corolla, watching him work and trying to process everything that had happened. The morning sun felt strange on my skin, too bright, like I was seeing colors that shouldn't exist. Every reflective surface, my car's side mirrors, the puddles in the parking lot, even the chrome on Pete's truck bumper, seemed to shimmer with potential threat. "How long do I have?" I asked. Pete hammered another nail into the last board. "Before she finds a way out? Hard to say. Could be months, could be years. But she will find a way, and when she does, the first thing she'll do is track you down. And then what? Then she'll finish what we interrupted. She'll use your connection to cross over permanently, wearing your face, carrying your memories. Everyone you've ever known will think you've come home." The thought made my stomach turn. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts. Mom, Dad, Jessica, my ex-girlfriend, college friends I hadn't spoken to in months. all of them potential victims of something wearing my identity. There are others like me, aren't there? I asked. People who broke the rules, who got marked. Pete leaned against his truck, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. More than you'd think. Virginia's got a network. Convenience stores, truck stops, diners, hotels. Places where the thin spots appear. Where things from the other side try to push through. Each one has rules, protocols, ways to keep the barriers intact. He pulled out his phone and showed me a contact list that must have had 50 entries. Names like Betty's Diner, I-81, Pine Ridge Motel, Route 58, Murphy's Gas, Eastern Shore. We call it the circuit, Pete continued. Been running for over a century, passed down through families or sold to people desperate enough to take on the responsibility. Most folks last about 5 years before they burn out, sell to the next poor soul who needs the money. What happens to the people who break the rules? Some go mad, like Daddy. Some disappear entirely. But a few. He scrolled through his contacts and stopped at a name. Maria Santos, mobile unit. A few learned to run smart. Pete dialed the number and put it on speaker. The voice that answered was female, mid-30s, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Pete. Christ, it's been 3 years. Please tell me this isn't what I think it is. Afraid so, Maria. Had a breach last night. The web boy got marked trying to contain it. A long pause. How bad? Doppelganger. Class 3. Manifestation. We got her trapped, but you know how that goes. Temporary at best. I heard the sound of typing in the background. What's the kid's background? Pete looked at me expectantly. I leaned toward the phone. Garrett Webb, 24. From Richmond originally. No family history of this stuff. Good. Clean slate makes it easier. Garrett, I'm Maria Santos. I've been running from something like your doppelganger for 8 years now. The key is never staying in one place more than 3 months, never using your real name for anything official, and never, ever looking at your reflection after sunset. That's how I'm supposed to live for the rest of my life. Maria laughed, but there was no humor in it. Kid, you're looking at this wrong. You're not running from something. You're running toward becoming something else. The marking changes you, makes you sensitive to the thin places. With practice, you can sense them before you stumble into them. What's that supposed to mean? It means you could help others. Join the circuit. There are places all over the country that need someone who can spot the signs, someone who knows what to look for. Pete was nodding. Maria's right. The marking's a curse, but it's also a kind of training. You survived a Class 3 breach, Garrett. Most people would have been consumed entirely. I thought about the moment in the mirror when the doppelganger had tried to pull me through, the way I'd managed to break free just long enough to shatter the glass. It hadn't felt like strength or skill, more like stubborn Virginia mule-headedness, the same trait that had gotten me in trouble my whole life. Where would I go? I'll text you an address in Tennessee, Maria said. There's a truck stop outside Nashville where the owner's been getting visitors like your red car lady. He could use someone with fresh eyes. After Pete hung up, we spent the next hour loading my car with supplies from his duffel bag, salt, iron filings, mirrors wrapped in black cloth, and a small leather journal filled with his great-grandmother's handwriting. Rules for different types of entities, he explained. Not everything's the same as what we deal with here. The mountain areas have different problems. Things that live in caves, creatures that hunt by sound rather than sight. The coastal regions are worse, old things that came up from the ocean floor, spirits of drowned sailors that never learned they were dead. He handed me a sealed envelope. "Don't open this unless you're facing something that doesn't fit any of the patterns in the journal. Last resort only." I tucked the envelope into my jacket pocket. "What will you do now?" "Retire for real this time. Move in with my sister in Roanoke. Help raise her grandkids. Maybe they'll have better luck than our family did." Pete looked back at the boarded-up store, his life's work reduced to plywood and warning sigils. This place served its purpose. Time to let someone else hold the line. As I prepared to leave, Pete gave me one final piece of advice. "Don't try to contact anyone from your old life, Garrett. Not your parents, not friends, not even to say goodbye. The connection works both ways, remember? She can use your emotions against you, turn your love for them into a hunting ground." I nodded, though the thought of never seeing my family again felt like a physical wound. Pete must have seen the pain in my face because he gripped my shoulder. "It's not forever," he said. "Just until we figure out a more permanent solution. The circuit's been working on new containment methods, better ways to strengthen the barriers. Maybe someday." But we both knew he was lying. Some doors, once opened, could never be fully closed. I drove away from Wickham's Quick Stop at 9:17 a.m. on a gray November morning, watching it disappear in my rearview mirror until the pine trees swallowed it completely. Route 60 stretched ahead of me, leading toward Tennessee and whatever new horror waited there. As I passed the turn for Hampton-Sydney College, I remembered the night I'd misdirected that caller toward Burkeville, how the red Camaro had followed them into the darkness. I wondered if I'd saved a life that night or simply postponed a death. The radio crackled to life, picking up a country station out of Lynchburg. The DJ was talking about the weather, clear skies ahead, temperatures rising, a good day for travel. Normal things for normal people living normal lives. But when I glanced at my rearview mirror to check for traffic, my reflection wasn't alone. The doppelganger sat in my passenger seat, grinning with my face, wearing clothes that were almost, but not quite right. She waved at me through the mirror, mouthing words I couldn't hear but somehow understood. "See you soon." I forced myself to look away, focusing on the road ahead. The journal on my passenger seat fell open to a page titled "Signs of Incomplete Containment," and I realized that trapping her in the mirror hadn't been a victory. It had been a temporary delay in a game I was only beginning to understand. Miles ahead, a billboard advertised, "Murphy's Truck Stop, next exit." The same name from Pete's contact list. I checked the fuel gauge, half full, enough to make it to Tennessee without stopping. But as I approached the off-ramp, I saw a red pickup truck parked beside the road, hazard lights blinking. A woman stood beside it, wearing my face, my clothes, holding a sign that read, "Help." She'd found her first hunting ground. Murphy's Truck Stop sat like a fluorescent island in the Tennessee darkness, 18-wheelers arranged around it like metal buffalo drinking from a watering hole. I pulled into the parking lot 3 hours after sunset, my nerves frayed from constantly checking mirrors and fighting the urge to look directly at my own reflection. The fake hitchhiker wearing my face had vanished after I'd driven past without stopping, but I knew she was still out there. Every exit ramp between Virginia and Tennessee had felt like a trap. Every rest stop, a potential hunting ground where she could be wearing my identity, using my voice to lure unsuspecting victims. Jimmy Murphy was waiting for me at the diner counter, exactly as Maria had described, 60-something, gray beard, wearing coveralls with Murphy's embroidered in faded red thread. He looked up when I entered, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who'd learned to spot things that didn't belong. "You must be Garrett," he said, offering a weathered hand. "Maria told me you were coming. Said you might be able to help with our little problem." I shook his hand, noting the calluses and the small scar across his knuckles. Details that proved he was real, not another entity wearing a borrowed face. What kind of problem? Jimmy gestured toward the back booths where 3 truckers sat drinking coffee. They looked normal enough. Tired men in flannel shirts and baseball caps, the kind you'd see at any truck stop from Virginia to California. But something about their posture bothered me. The way they sat too straight, too still. "They've been here for 6 days," Jimmy said quietly. "Same booth, same order, black coffee and apple pie. They pay with cash, tip exactly 15%, and never use the restroom. When other drivers try to talk to them, they give the same answers word for word." I studied the 3 men more carefully. Now that Jimmy had pointed it out, I could see the wrongness. Their movements were too synchronized, like marionettes controlled by the same puppeteer. When one lifted his coffee cup, the other 2 did the same. When one turned his head, the others followed in perfect unison. "Have you tried asking them to leave?" "Tried everything. They just smile and say they're waiting for their load assignment. But according to the dispatch board, there haven't been any loads heading their direction in over a week." I pulled out Pete's journal and flipped through the pages until I found a section titled "Collective Manifestations." The description matched what I was seeing: multiple entities sharing a single consciousness, anchored to the physical world through repetitive behavior patterns. "They're not truckers," I said. "They're echoes, probably of real drivers who died on the road somewhere nearby. The repetitive routine is what keeps them manifested." "How do we get rid of them?" I kept reading. According to the journal, collective manifestations were particularly vulnerable to disruption of their established patterns. Break the routine, and they'd lose cohesion. We need to change something about their environment, something significant enough to break the loop they're stuck in. Jimmy nodded toward the coffee station. "Their pot's been brewing since they arrived. Same batch, same temperature. They refuse any fresh coffee." "Perfect." I walked over to the coffee station and dumped the entire pot down the drain, the dark liquid swirling away with a satisfied gurgle. Then I started brewing a fresh batch, using a different blend from the shelf, hazelnut instead of regular. The reaction was immediate. All 3 truckers turned toward me in perfect synchronization, their faces showing the first genuine expression I had seen since arriving: confusion that bordered on panic. "Excuse me," one of them said, his voice oddly flat. "We'd like our usual coffee, please." "Fresh pot coming right up," I replied, not looking directly at any of them. "Should be ready in 5 minutes." "We need the usual coffee," another repeated. "The usual coffee from the usual pot." But their usual pot was empty, draining down a pipe that led to a septic tank somewhere beneath the Tennessee soil. The routine they'd been trapped in for 6 days was broken. The truckers began to flicker like old television screens losing signal. For brief moments, I could see through them to the booth padding behind. Their voices grew fainter, overlapping each other as they repeated their request with increasing desperation. "Usual coffee, usual pot. We're waiting for our load." Then they were gone. Just empty coffee cups and pie plates that Jimmy quickly cleared away, whistling a tune I didn't recognize. "Been doing this long?" he asked as he loaded the dishes into a plastic tub. "About 12 hours, I admitted. Jimmy laughed. "You're a natural. Most folks take weeks to develop the instinct for this work." As if summoned by the compliment, my phone buzzed with a text from Maria. "How's your first night going? Any problems?" I typed back, handled some echo truckers, feeling more confident. Her reply came quickly. "Good, but But don't get cocky. The easy ones are just practice. She was right, of course. The collective manifestation had been relatively harmless, a nuisance rather than a genuine threat. But it had given me something I'd been missing since leaving Virginia: purpose. For the first time since the convenience store, I felt useful rather than hunted. Jimmy poured me coffee from the fresh pot and slid a piece of apple pie across the counter. On the house. Considerate payment for services rendered. The pie was excellent, sweet and tart, with a flaky crust that reminded me of the church dinners my grandmother used to drag me to in Danville. Normal food, normal conversation, normal human interaction. Things I'd started to think I might never experience again. That's when I noticed the television above the counter was showing my reflection. Not the regular security feed from the truck stop's cameras, but something else entirely. The screen showed me sitting at the counter, but the version of myself in the image was grinning too widely, showing teeth filed to points. As I watched, this other Garrett stood up from his stool and walked toward the screen from the inside. "Jimmy," I said carefully, not taking my eyes off the television. "Turn off the TV, right now." He looked up at the screen and swore in languages I didn't recognize. His hand shot toward the power button, but before he could reach it, the doppelganger pressed her palm against the inside of the glass. The screen began to bulge outward like a soap bubble. I grabbed the baseball bat Jimmy kept behind the counter and swung it at the television with everything I had. The screen exploded in a shower of glass and sparks. The doppelganger's scream cut short by the destruction of her crossing point. But in the seconds before the screen died, she'd managed to speak 2 words that echoed through the truck stop like a promise. "Found you." Jimmy and I stood in the aftermath, surrounded by broken glass and the smell of burnt electronics. The other customers, real truckers who'd been eating quietly at their tables, looked over with the practiced indifference of people who'd seen stranger things on the road. "She's getting stronger," I said, brushing glass off my jacket. "Or more desperate." Jimmy swept the debris into a dustpan with movements that spoke of long experience. "How many crossing attempts is that today?" "3 that I've noticed. Probably more I missed." Jimmy nodded grimly. Maria went through the same thing her first year. Multiple attempts daily, using every reflective surface she encountered. Eventually it tapered off, but it took time. How much time? About 2 years. 2 years of never looking directly at mirrors, of smashing televisions and avoiding still water, of living like a fugitive in my own body. The weight of that future settled on my shoulders like a lead blanket. But then I thought about the echo truckers, how solving that small problem had given me a sense of accomplishment I hadn't felt in months. Maybe Maria was right. Maybe I wasn't running from something, but toward becoming something else. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Garrett? This is Tom Bradley. I run a diner on Interstate 40 near Knoxville. Maria gave me your number. We've got a situation with our jukebox, but I think you might understand." I showed the message to Jimmy, who nodded approvingly. "Word travels fast in the circuit. You handle this Tennessee thing well, you'll have more work than you can handle." I finished my pie and coffee, left a 20 on the counter, and walked back to my car. The night air was crisp and clear, full of the promise of winter and the distant sound of diesel engines carrying freight across America. In my rearview mirror, the truck stop grew smaller and smaller until it was just another point of light in the darkness. But for the first time since leaving Virginia, I wasn't running away from something. I was driving toward my next assignment. The payphone at the abandoned Texaco station rang at exactly 3:17 a.m., just like Maria had warned me it would. I picked up on the second ring, standing in the Wyoming wind with my jacket collar turned up against the October cold. Garrett Webb. Mr. Webb. Mrs. Eleanor Hutchins. I run the Prairie Rose Motel outside Cheyenne. We met last spring when you helped with our elevator situation. I remembered Eleanor, sharp-eyed woman in her 70s who'd inherited a motel where the elevators sometimes took guests to floors that didn't exist. We'd solved it by disconnecting the call button for the 13th floor, which had never been built but somehow kept appearing on the control panel. What can I do for you, Eleanor? We've got a new problem. Room 237 has been rented continuously for 8 weeks, but housekeeping swears it's always empty when they clean it. The guest registry shows different names every few days, but they all pay with cash and sign with identical handwriting. I pulled out the weather-beaten notebook I'd been filling since Tennessee. Observations, patterns, solutions that worked, and ones that didn't. The circuit had taught me that documentation was survival. Every case built on the lessons from the last. Any reports of voices or cold spots in adjacent rooms? Room 235 has been complaining about crying sounds through the wall. Always around dawn, they say. Sounds like a child. I wrote down the details, already forming theories. Residual manifestation, probably linked to a recurring trauma. The kind of case that had become routine over the past year of working the circuit. I can be there by sunrise, I said. Keep everyone out of 237 until I arrive. After hanging up, I walked back to my truck, a used Ford I'd bought in Arkansas with cash from my growing reputation in the circuit. The back was loaded with supplies, salt, iron, blessed mirrors, and enough books on supernatural theory to stock a small library. My phone showed 17 missed calls from numbers I didn't recognize. The doppelganger's hunting had evolved beyond simple crossing attempts. Now she made calls using my voice, left voicemails as me, even sent texts to people I'd never met. The circuit had protocols for this too. Never answer unknown numbers, never respond to messages that seemed too familiar, never trust a phone call that sounded like yourself. As I drove through the dark Wyoming landscape, I thought about Pete back in Roanoke, helping raise his sister's grandchildren. He called me every few weeks using a secure line Maria had set up. Updates from a normal world I could observe but never rejoin. "You're making a difference," he'd told me during our last conversation. "The reports coming back to the circuit, the problems you've solved. Daddy would be proud." The dashboard clock read 4:43 a.m. when I reached the Prairie Rose Motel. Eleanor was waiting in the lobby with coffee and a manila folder thick with incident reports. The work would be challenging, dangerous, and would probably take several days to complete properly. But as I studied the documentation and planned my approach, I felt something I'd never expected after leaving Virginia. Contentment. Not happiness exactly. That felt too far beyond reach. But the deep satisfaction of work that mattered, of skills hard-earned and properly applied. The doppelganger was still out there, wearing my face in truck stop mirrors and gas station windows. Someday she'd find a way to cross over permanently, and when that happened, I'd have to face her again. The circuit was already working on contingency plans, new containment methods, ways to strengthen the barriers between worlds. But until then, I had ghost stories to solve and people to protect. Outside room 237, a child was crying, lost, afraid, trapped between worlds by circumstances beyond her understanding. I picked up my toolkit and walked toward the sound. After all, someone had to answer when the strange things called for help.